Okay, I think we'll start. We still may have some people joining us, both in the room and over the internet. This event is being streamed. And for reporters that are joining us via the internet, there will be an opportunity after opening remarks to ask questions, as well as for those in the room. When we get to the question and answer portion of the news conference, I would like to ask anyone who's a member of the press club or a member of the working press to identify yourself by name and your news organization. And on behalf of the Newsmaker Committee of the National Press Club, we're very honored to have with us today the Chief Executive Officer of ICANN, Rod Beckstrom, and the Board Chair, Stephen Crocker. And my name's Jamie Horwitz, and it's my honor to be here today. And it's funny, when I was coming here today, I was thinking about a conversation I'd had about 20 years ago with a man who was then in his 90s, who had been a farm boy in Indiana at the time that this press club started 104 years ago. And when I had lunch with him, I asked him, well, in your lifetime, there's been so many changes, both in technology and in terms of the society. What is the change that had the greatest effect on your life? And I was surprised. He said to me that it was when he was a young boy that Teddy Roosevelt had created rural free delivery, and that his family, prior to that, only went into town in a horse and wagon once a week and got a newspaper once a week, and they felt attached to the world once a week. But when they got mail 6 days a week, it meant they had a newspaper come through the mail every day, 6 days of the week, with news that was 2-3 days old. And this building is still here in that time period, but it's amazing how far we've come, that a farm boy in Indiana or a child in rural India has really almost infinite reach into news and information. And today, in our news conference, we're going to talk about really a further expansion of that reach and of news and information. And so I think our speakers will speak for 5 or 10 minutes. We want to allow a lot of time for questions. And so with that, why don't I turn it over to you?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jamie, and thank you, National Press Club, for this opportunity for us to speak with you. I'll make some brief remarks, and I think maybe Steve will complement those, round them out, and then we're very happy to take your questions. ICANN is an international, consensus-driven organization that uses a bottom-up policy development process to develop our policies globally. And our commitment is to a globally unified, stable, and secure internet. After 6 years of intensive development, later today or tomorrow, GMT time, heralds a new era in the domain name system and yet another milestone in the development of the internet, with the opening of the third round of generic top-level domains, or what we call new generic top-level domains for the internet. This will go online, and applicants from around the world will be able to apply for domain names either in Latin characters or in their own native scripts of different languages. And this is the first time in the history of the internet that generic top-level domains can be created in non-Latin characters, such as Chinese, Arabic, Devanagari for the Hindi language, etc. It's been developed through very deliberate, very thorough and exhaustive debates, discussions, and revisions of the community. The applicant guidebook, which is the rule book for the program for its implementation, is over 300 pages in total. We'll be publishing the 8th version of that tomorrow, which includes very, very minor clarifications as a result of the questions that have been coming into our website online. We've consulted heavily with governments around the world and received government input for over 80 changes in the program. We were able to accommodate more than 70 of those last year. And the program is ready to launch. From an operational standpoint, the executive team is prepared. The operational teams are prepared, including the application processing team. The third-party contractors have all been signed up. The panelists for the review panels have been contracted with, and the technology systems have been developed and tested. We are prepared to launch this program professionally and fairly and objectively, which is our job at ICANN, because we're a technical coordinator for the domain name system, and it's not for us to choose favorites. We will administer the program fairly per the program guidelines that have been published so that any party has a fair chance equal to the quality of their application. We also think that the world is ready for this innovation. We have traveled through 38 countries collectively over the last 4 months. I personally have visited 16 and met with the private sector, with governments, with NGOs, different groups to talk about this program. We've had discussions and debates. These were not one-sided presentations, but they were, we often brought parties to the table that had different views about the program. Some liked it, some didn't. That's fine. ICANN's role was never to advocate this program. ICANN's role is to educate and then to implement and then to deliver fairly. But we did learn that there's considerable interest, as you've also noted in the press, and controversial with some parties and some stakeholders in particular. So why, in the wake of intense criticism, are we moving ahead? Because we believe that this program will do what it's designed to do, which is open up the Internet domain name system to further innovation. There are many protections in the program to protect various rights holders, including trademark rights holders and businesses, but also other rights and concerns that parties have. We think that the competition that offering these new choices offers will help accomplish our mission of creating more consumer choice and competition in the global marketplace. And domain name prices in the gTLD registries have dropped by approximately 70% since ICANN was formed just 12 years ago. That's created significant benefit for users of the Internet around the world. And we certainly hope that this new program will create even more competition in the Internet in the future. And we think it'll unleash innovation. For one thing, even having new top-level domains that are not all in Latin characters is an enhancement to the Internet, and it will be interesting to see what happens. We certainly have heard expressions of potential interest informally from parties, and we'll see what they announce publicly and what they choose to apply for. Some of the protections that are built into this program include criminal background checks for the officers of the organizations that apply for the top-level domains. We have a public comment period on all of the strings. So after we collect all the applications from January 12th through April 12th, we'll publish for you and the world to review every single string that's been applied for and who's applied for it. And anyone in the world can comment and can say they object to a string, or they find it objectionable, or they like it, or whatever the comment might be. But it'll be open for public comment. It'll also be open for objections, formal objections, through the panel decision processes where expert panelists outside of ICANN will make the decision on who loses and who wins in those disputes. And if the loser is the applicant, then their application will fail and will not move forward. There's also a trademark clearinghouse that's being created, which is a database where any party that can prove they have government documentation to show they own a trademark or service mark can register it in the database, and then be informed in the future if anyone in the world registers their mark at the second level in any of the new top-level domain registries. This has not been done before and is a novel and I think important structure and part of the program. We've had multiple bidders to provide those services, and we'll be choosing an outsourced service provider soon. There's also a sunrise registration period, which means when a new top-level domain actually comes into the root of the Internet and goes operational, we call it the sunrise. There's a period of time during which trademark holders have a preemptive right to go and register domain names before other parties are allowed into the new registry. And then there's also, we're utilizing existing dispute resolution processes, as well as introducing new dispute resolution processes in this version of the program. So there's a significant set of protections. It's one of the reasons it's taken the community 6 years to develop and agree upon this program, to the point that the board could come and vote on June 20th of last year in Singapore to approve the launch, which occurs tomorrow. There's also limited financial assistance for needy applicants, especially from developing countries. And there was a request that we lower the application fees from $185,000, which covers ICANN's estimated costs. It's a break-even program with a separate funding and accounts. But the request is to lower the fees from $185,000 to $47,000. The ICANN board has agreed to set aside $2 million to support that program, and we're now working out those details based on the public comment that's been received, but we're hoping that will help some needy applicants around the world to be able to participate in the program that might not have been able to otherwise. The application guidebook, I think, as I mentioned, will be published again tomorrow with minor clarifications, but there'll be no significant changes or new news there. Simply, we'll incorporate the clarifying comments that we've been providing online in the question and answer section of the new gTLD's website. So those are my comments, and Steve?
Thank you, Rod. You covered essentially all of the elements, so that's great. I'll be very brief. Rod focused on the very extensive work in the last 6 years. Jamie gave a perspective of 100 years, roughly. I want to choose a couple of points in between those two. The network technology that we're dealing with was started in the late 1960s, early 1970s, and as we have all experienced, has grown explosively. ICANN is 12 years or so old, and was started as a consequence of the details that were necessary to manage the explosive growth, one aspect of the explosive growth that comes with the network technology, and that had to do with the management of the domain names, the address space, and the other identifiers that are sort of hold the core pieces of the network together. We don't have anything to do with the operations, we don't have anything to do with the transport of actual data, but just sort of the directory structure, if you will, of the names turned out to be an ever growing picture. We have, by various estimates, 2 billion or more users on the internet, and there's persistent discussion about getting the rest of the human population attached to the network. And so that's a very interesting position to be in, because we're now, instead of looking at the beginnings or the explosive growth, it's almost as if we're looking at how do we complete the picture and get everybody involved. And in the same fashion, with the domain name system, we've held back for quite a long time on the expansion of the top-level domain system, to be very careful with it. We had a couple of earlier rounds that were very limited, and now we're poised to open it up. And again, it's a sense of completing and opening up to be inclusive for everybody. And as Rod emphasized, and I would certainly echo, because of the American origins of the internet and the initial foundations that are all based on the traditional Latin letters and numbers, there's been a less than complete treatment of other scripts, of Chinese, of Arabic, of Cyrillic, of Hindi, and so forth. One of the attributes of this opening that's taking place tomorrow is to embrace not only new top-level domains in the existing environments, but also around the world, so that this is a major step in the globalization of the internet and providing equal access and equal invitation, if you will, to users over the entire world. And so that's a very positive step that I think we're all quite excited about. The window opens tomorrow. It stays open for 3 months. We've arranged things carefully so that there is no need to have a land rush at the very beginning. So tomorrow is extremely important. The next important date, if you will be the date when the window closes, and then fairly rapidly after that, the world will see how many applications have come in, what names have been chosen, and we'll all have a lot more data to look at in this process.
Very good. Well, thank you. So we're going to move into the question and answer period now. We have a number of reporters that are on the phone as well as folks in the room. And again, just to take care of a couple housekeeping items. When I recognize you either on the phone or in the room, please state your name and your news organization. If you are on the phones and watching this via streaming, reporters should hit number 3 on their phones, #3, excuse me. And Mills is in the back of the room there, and he has a microphone. And so if you're in the room, if you could wait for Mills to hand you the microphone before answering your question so that people who are watching this via the internet will be able to clearly hear your question, that would be helpful. And one last housekeeping item too, especially since we're streaming this and the internet is a good source of advertising events, I just want to point out that tomorrow's Newsmaker is at 10 a.m. with both Tavis Smiley and Susie Orman here at 10 a.m. But having said all that, let's take some questions. Yes, sir.
Thank you. My name is David McCauley with Bloomberg BNA. My question, Steve, is for you. As you know, the Government Advisory Council has expressed some concern about being overwhelmed by the number of applications and having difficulty in letting their comments be known within an agreed-upon 60-day period. And I've seen in the board materials that were posted that there is flexibility expressed on ICANN's part. My question is, how will you exercise flexibility? Is there a formula developed, or how will the Government Affairs Advisory Council concerns be addressed?
I'll give a brief answer and leave it to Rod to fill in whatever details need to be added. The first most important thing is that we're absolutely committed to working closely and effectively and in a very sensible way with the Governmental Advisory Committee. There's estimates of how many applications are going to come in. The 60 days is an estimate of how much time it will take them. I think there's no problem adjusting what the sorry, let me kill this. There's no problem adjusting the timing and the mechanism and so forth. So as the applications come in, we'll get an estimate of what the size of the problem is as they develop their techniques for processing these. We'll stay in close cooperation. So this is really a refinement among cooperative parties as opposed to an adversarial or a hard problem. And there's no value in us overwhelming them with applications and then saying you didn't respond. That's a silly position to be in. So it's quite the opposite, and something common sense will emerge out of this.
Okay. Yes, in the back.
Yesterday, and my name is Amy Mushawar, I represent the Association of National Advertisers and Credo, a coalition of 160 trade associations and Fortune 1000 companies. Yesterday at CSIS...
Excuse me, are you a member of the press?
No, I'm not.
Well,
but
because we give preference to reporters and members of the press club first. So.
Oh, most certainly. Then I will wait.
I would like to, and those were my first remarks. So, if you
I
wouldn't
will
mind
wait.
holding off. Thank you very much. Any other reporters or press club members? Yes. Up front here. Sorry, Mills.
Do I need the mic?
Yeah, I think so for the folks that are listening in.
I'm Jennifer Martinez from Politico. I think I'm going to ask the question that you were about to ask. It's about ANA's proposal that they put forward this week. I believe there's some concerns that people's copyright or trademarks are going to be possibly infringed upon with this new system. So I wanted to see if you were going to take that proposal into consideration and see where that was.
I can take this is yours.
Sure, sure. Yes, we received the letter, and we do what we do with letters, which is we post them publicly on our website so that they can inform the policy development process and the community. The ICANN policy development process works through the community bodies. Particularly, there's 3 organs that develop policies: the ASO, the Address Supporting Organization, the GNSO, the Generic Name Supporting Organization, and then the CCNSO, the Country Code Name Supporting Organization. Those are the 3 that initiate policy initiatives. And then there's 4 different advisory groups. We just talked about one, the Governmental Advisory Committee. The place where new policy proposals should come in, or amendments to existing policies, is through the bottom-up policy development process. That's why we post the letters publicly, and we hope that ANA will continue to engage through the GNSO as they have for years. And in fact, many of their previous suggestions to the GNSO have been incorporated in the policy and in the program. But the CEO of ICANN certainly doesn't develop policy, and it's done through the organization and through community processes. So that's where that would need to be considered.
Next question. Yes, sir.
Thank you. Nico Pandey from GG Press Japan. Mr. Beckstrom, I was hoping you could expound a little bit more on the dispute resolution panels that you were talking about earlier. Specifically, could you kind of walk us through what happens? I understand there's protections for entities who are trying to protect their trademarks, but if through the evaluation process, if there's 2 or more applicants who are determined to have equally legitimate rights to a particular string, could you tell us how determination is made about which one is granted that string? I think I read in the handbook or the manual, the guidebook, sorry, that there was an auction process, but I didn't know if that related to what I'm specifically referring to about competing interests or not. So
The auction process is one of the different mechanisms. So let me try to briefly summarize the program. The program is very complex, and the authoritative document is the published applicant guidebook that we're updating tomorrow. There's 4 different categories of objections. There are objections on intellectual property grounds, such as if someone files for a TLD that doesn't own a trademark for that term and you own that trademark, you can file an objection. There's independent IP experts staff that panel. We've developed those procedures as a part of this program and published that online. There's objections for limited public interest. To summarize that loosely, that refers to issues of slang or inappropriate language, religion, offensive terms, anything culturally sensitive. That's a different panel process to file those objections and have it considered. There is another objection on community grounds. So if a party says, I represent this community of people and we want to apply for .name, which is a tribe name or something else, then they're going to have to substantiate that. If they're challenged, they will have to prove that. There's a separate set of experts that are used to make those determinations. And then there's also objections based on string confusion. So perhaps you own a brand. Well, what happens if someone else applies for something that looks like your brand with an S added to it? So it's plural. That would be an example of string contention. But there's other cases of string contentions across, like Latin string set and Cyrillic. Some things can look the same and similar, and others don't. So those are when and after we publish the strings in early May that have been applied for, there's a 7-month period of time when any party can file a formal objection. It'll be loser pay, so there's a cost for those outside expert panels. But anyone can provide a public comment. So if you've got a set of, let's say you have 2 applicants for the same strings. If one of them loses in one of the objections, they're gone, and it'll go to the other. But let's say they both make it through. Okay, so there might have been objections processes, but they survived. And let's say they passed all of our other checks, the background checks, the financial checks, the technical operation checks. And so they're deemed to be equivalent or valid. We will then notify both parties. You have both passed these initial evaluation steps. And now we encourage you to work out this issue with one another, and we give them a time period. If they work it out, that's up to them. If they cannot work it out, it goes to auction, and the proceeds will go to a charitable cause that will be determined by the community at a subsequent time. It won't go into ICANN general funds. So, and the reason you use a market process is Coase's theorem in economics, which is used in many fields of policy making. And Coase's theorem says that markets are very efficient in allocating resources to the highest social benefit and economic benefit. So there is an auction mechanism. We don't know if it'll ever be used, in some ways we hope it won't be, because it'll complicate our lives. We have to set up the structure, handle those funds, and create this different process that would handle that. But so That is what happened. Now, let me give you another scenario, though. Let's say you have two applications that come through, and one's from a community and one's from a business. The community application will win. Community applications, which have a slightly, you have to identify that in your application, and you have to define your community and provide some documentation in support of it. Those applications receive preference to what we call standard applications, which can be filed by any other party. So that's a simplified, summarized version of some of the mechanisms for when you have competing applicants for the same string.
Great.
And we're happy to expand on that outside of this. Thank you.
I think what we'll do is go to the phones now and take a question from the phone. Kieran McCarthy, are you with us on the phone?
Hello, yes, can you hear me?
Yes, can you tell us where you're calling from and what news organization you're with, please?
Sure, it's Kieran McCarthy here from .next. And I have a question. One of the biggest concerns that's been raised repeatedly in letters from Congress and in editorials in the Washington Post and the New York Times and in a letter to ICANN from Secretary Strickland is that of defensive registrations and cyber squatting and the concerns that this will explode with new lower domains. Now, I've never heard ICANN's position on this. I've heard that you said that we have protections in place and we're aware of that, but is your position that these concerns are overblown, that they simply won't happen, that the protections are sufficient, or do you view it as a price worth paying with this expansion of the Internet?
Sure. Well, thank you for your question, Karen, about cyber squatting. Clearly, cyber squatting is an issue that parties are concerned about today in the domain name space, where over 200 million domain names are registered. And it's one of the concerns, among others, that has been significantly debated and discussed and thought about in this program. And as I mentioned, probably the most exhaustive policy review, comments, and revisions have gone into the intellectual property protection components of this program. And if one defines cyber squatting as parties registering domain names which they don't own so they could get money from trademark owners who do, then clearly there are many provisions in this program to help protect trademark owners. There's at least 9 components of the program that contribute to the protection of trademark owners that start with a public comment period and start with the objections process and continue all the way up to the very end. Even after we've put something into the root of the internet, we have something called the PDDRP, or Post-Delegation Dispute Resolution Process, which says that if a registry operator is not living up to their agreement and they're allowing abuse to occur in their top-level domain and have showed that repeated tendency, ICANN actually has the right to take that registry back, which has never happened before in the history of the domain name system. We never had that right. We never had that capability. And that was something the community wanted done as a ultimate enforcement mechanism or incentive to encourage good behavior. So cyber squatting is an issue out there. It's not going to go away. I think the community has worked hard to develop protections in this program. And this program has been developed through an open policy development process. And it can evolve again in the future, because every applicant also has to acknowledge that ICANN reserves the right to change this program in the future. So if the community develops new mechanisms that it thinks can enhance the program, and there's community agreement and consensus on that, that can go up through the community and to the board of ICANN, and if the board approves it, then we'll execute it and support it.
Very good. Well, let's go back to the room. Yes, sir. Mills, do you want to get a mic over there? Thank you.
I'm Kit Fox with the Medill News Service, and I've talked to a few applicants who have expressed frustration at the changes that have been made to the guidebook, and I just wanted to know why those changes were made so recently before the process opens, and kind of just understand why they were made, basically.
Which changes are people concerned about?
I know you had an update come out this morning, and they just had expressed frustration.
I would have to hear more specifics. I'm surprised to hear frustration, given that it's really only clarifications on aspects of the program, no significant new content. That's not to say that someone's isn't upset with some change, but I'm just not aware of any changes that would be considered particularly onerous for parties or concerning. But I'm open to hearing specifics, so please do share it.
Okay, next question. Before we go back to anyone again, is there anyone who has not asked a question in the room? No? Please, let's go back to Bloomberg.
It's David McCauley again, Bloomberg BNA. Rod, just to follow up on a point you made on communities having preference between a community and a business, how does trademark figure into that concept? For instance, let's say the community of Oshkosh, Wisconsin wants to get that name, but there's a clothing company that wants the name. How does that work?
I'm going to actually defer to one of my intellectual property experts on the staff. I believe that the community has a preference if they can justify that they are a community and they use that name, and that name is a part of their identity, and that's well documented and historic. But that's a summarized description of what's more precise legal language. So in this case, in a simplified sense, I'd say the community would win, because they are truly a community of Oshkosh. Now, you can't create a brand new community today and call it Oshkosh and have incorporation papers and go put some money in it and say this is now a community and therefore we want to have this, because that would lead to abuse. So, and that's one of the reasons there's the community objection process, is so that there's not an abuse of the community privileges that communities receive in the program.
Okay. Well, let's see. Is that Brad? Is that? Well, yeah, we have somebody here. We have a question from Germany. Monica, are you on the phone?
Yes. Hi. Hello. How are you?
Good. Can you further identify yourself? Can you tell us who you're with, please?
Okay, I'm with Heise Online in Germany. I have a question on the IANA contract provision. There has been talk about adding a new clause that would make IANA to do additional checks before they enter a new TLD to the route. What is the status of the IANA contract and of this clause especially?
The IANA contract is currently out for bid, and the contract itself and the bid rules specify that any parties that might be participating in that process are not to be discussing it publicly, so I have no comment.
Okay. Are there any other questions over the phone? If not, we'll go back to the room. Okay, well then, any questions from any reporters in the room? I think if we don't have any other questions, then we'll probably end the formal portion of the press conference here, and then anyone that wants to ask questions of our speakers, I'm sure they'll be more than willing to stick around and answer some questions. But I want to thank everyone who's been watching online and joining us by phone, as well as everyone who came out today. And especially I want to thank our guests for joining us. And on behalf of the National Press Club, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And secure internet. After 6 years of intensive development, later today or tomorrow, GMT time heralds a new era in the domain name system and yet another milestone in the development of the internet, with the opening of the third round of generic top-level domains, or what we call new generic top-level domains for the internet. This will go online, and applicants from around the world will be able to apply for domain names either in Latin characters or in their own native scripts of different languages. And this is the first time in the history of the internet.
He said to me that it was when he was a young boy that Teddy Roosevelt had created rural free delivery, and that his family prior to that only went into town in a horse and wagon once a week and got a newspaper once a week, and they felt attached to the world once a week. But when they got mail 6 days a week, it meant they had a newspaper come through the mail every day, 6 days of the week, with news that was 2-3 days old. And this building is still here in that time period, but it's amazing how far we've come, that a farm boy in Indiana or a child in rural India has really almost infinite reach into news and information. And today, in our news conference, we're going to talk about really further. Very honored to have with us today the Chief Executive Officer of ICANN, Rod Beckstrom, and the Board Chair, Stephen Crocker. And my name's Jamie Horwitz, and it's my honor to be here today. And it's funny, when I was coming here today, I was thinking about a conversation I'd had about 20 years ago with a man who was then in his 90s, who had been a farm boy in Indiana at the time that this press club started 104 years ago. And when I had lunch with him, I asked him, well, in your lifetime, there's been so many changes, both in technology and in terms of the society. What is the change that had the greatest effect on your life? And I was surprised expansion of that reach and of news and information. And so I think our speakers will speak for 5 or 10 minutes. We want to allow a lot of time for questions. And so with that, why don't I turn it over to you?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jamie, and thank you, National Press Club, for this opportunity for us to speak with you. I'll make some brief remarks, and I think maybe Steve will complement those, round them out, and then we're very happy to take your questions. ICANN is an international, consensus-driven organization that uses a bottom-up policy development process to develop our policies globally. And our commitment is to a globally unified, stable,
Okay, I think we'll start. We still may have some people joining us, both in the room and over the internet. This event is being streamed. And for reporters that are joining us via the internet, there will be an opportunity after opening remarks to ask questions, as well as for those in the room. When we get to the question and answer portion of the news conference, I would like to ask anyone who's a member of the press club or a member of the working press to identify yourself by name and your news organization. And on behalf of the Newsmaker Committee of the National Press Club, we're